So we're recording this workshop, and what I'd like to do is make that available to all of my players and to the LARP community and the gaming community at large, so they have more resources for this. Because I think if we'd gone over steering a little bit more, it might have helped. You know, we've all run into that person that says, oh, I don't really hate women, I'm not really racist, it's just that my character is. And of course that happens with more frequency even when you have a historical bent to your game, because there's, you know, precedence, because these systemic issues have always existed in the world. So thank you for joining us and being willing to learn. Again, this one is going to be recorded, so if you're not comfortable with having your name on it, or you don't want to appear, feel free to go ahead and change your Zoom name, and feel free to stay off camera if you're not comfortable with that. So my name is Tara Clapper, and I run the Geek Initiative Larps. You can also find us on Facebook on the Geek Initiative LARP and Gaming community, where we have discussions about this kind of stuff all the time. And I am joined by Dee Crawley, and Dee and I met actually by digital LARPing. She actually played my Chariot LARP as her first LARP and has been involved in the community ever since. And Ray, thank you for that question. I believe the recording does also record the chat. I'm not entirely sure, but I think that is an option. So thank you for asking. And I know we can definitely export that separately. So do be mindful of what you say in the chat. Also, if you don't want that to appear online. So, I talked a bit about what really prompted this, and I felt like there was a big need for this, and also a need for other voices in the conversation, which is why Dee graciously volunteered to join me. And, we want to discuss what steering is and how you can do it, but we do also have a guide to character steering that we put together, which you'll see Amber post in there as well. Thank you, Amber. So feel free to use that guide. It's a PDF. You can download it, print it, take some notes on it, and use that for each gaming experience that you join. Because some LARPs will discuss, and other games will discuss steering, and some won't. So our goals are to discuss this. So we're going to kind of talk more at you for a little bit, and then we're going to have more of a discussion and go through that workshop document, answer some questions. And we don't know everything, so we also want to open it up to others who have different experiences as well. We're going to do our best to cover different types of role-playing games. As I said, we've both played text-based role-playing games and LARPs and tabletop role-playing games, and we're going to do our best to cover all of those. I know for me, I tend to get really LARP-centric just because I'm always immersed in LARP, so apologies if I veer more into LARPing, but hopefully these tools and lessons will work for any type of role-playing experience you have. Even if you're doing role-playing online in like World of Warcraft or something, you want to have those expectations met for what you're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and start by talking about what is character steering. And I really feel that using cultural awareness, sensitivity, and other meta information, or things that we know in real life, you can make in-game decisions and actions that make people feel safe and included in and out of game. And I feel like that out-of-game information isn't necessarily bad. Some of us come from like a Boffer LARP background where there's so many secrets that you're not allowed to know, but sometimes it's good to know those things out of game and to make decisions with that information, and decisions about what your character does to positively affect the story and make sure other people are comfortable. I'm gonna throw it over to Dee and ask, do you have anything to add about the definition of character steering?
I think the main thing I would say with character steering, particularly in regards to meta information, is meta information does not have to be spoilers. I think sometimes we think about meta information as, oh, this will lead to someone god modding or doing something, taking something that they know out of game into game, giving too much information about what they have in mind for what comes next or what they want to do. But really, meta information can be as simple as just a tagline for your character um, during the first workshop before a game. Um, Technically, meta information, if you do text role plays, are profiles. And that information can be super informative in understanding where other players are coming from, thinking about ways to expand your own play and uplift others. I'm a big fan of any form of collaborative storytelling being a way to, sometimes empower, sometimes just uplift the stories of other characters and other players. So all of that can come from using some of that meta information, because if I know that Tara's character has a very specific goal and aim, and oh, I'm playing a wealthy character that could fund Tara's expedition. Why not take the initiative to try and be in the same room at the same time? Um, so I'm a big advocate of meta information, and in terms of the historical role play that I was part of, that Tara started, I think that has been a critical part of it more than anything else. It also helps with being aware of other players culturally. And I want to point out that sometimes people make this sound so separate from how non-marginalized players should be treated, that we don't have to be culturally sensitive to someone who's white or Christian or this and that. But when we're aware of people's backgrounds and what they're looking for and what their characters are looking for, everybody benefits, you know. But that's all I wanted to add.
That's a lot of great info. And I think also, as you learn to calibrate with people over time and play with them kind of in longer term, you get a good feeling about what they're comfortable sort of being pressed on and what you want to back away from. So, for example, I'm a cis woman, and I sometimes like the challenge of playing against the patriarchy in a game. I like an empowerment arc where, a male character, exerts that kind of patriarchal power, and I get to actually play against it. Or there's something systemic that, oh, well, you're a woman, you can't have this kind of job in 1774. I like kind of bucking that trend and saying, okay, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And that's also an example of how in our historical game we've kind of steered around history a bit to make sure that our characters could be included, because otherwise my character wouldn't really be, our characters wouldn't have a lot of power in the game. It would mostly just be a bunch of white male characters playing with each other because they had all the power historically. So, you can do things like that, especially in historical games, to play around it. And of course, in fantasy games, it's more about being aware of the setting. And I think when you join these different gaming experiences, it's really important that as organizers, even if you don't have like a big website for your adventure, you kind of put the expectations out there. This is the tone of the game that we're trying to set. These are the themes we want to cover. These are the things we want to avoid. This is how acceptable or accessible this is. So the more information you can kind of put out there about what you expect and the kind of players you want to attract to the game, that's great. And steering really starts with those big high level things. And if you're writing a game or running a game, that can really help. One thing I want to give a shout out to Damerung Larp. I used to work with them. They're doing like a Viking style LARP, and they're based in the United States, and they started getting a lot of like Nazis just coming into their game because Nazis have been appropriating Viking stuff and interest and that heritage, and the game runners wanted to do the opposite of that. They wanted to create an inclusive gaming environment. So I advised them as their consultant to actually create an anti-Nazi policy. It was like, if you don't want these kinds of people there and you do want to include people who have been marginalized by them, you need to just create a statement. And so sometimes it starts there. the steering starts there by having what kind of people you want in the game. But we're going to get down to more of the nitty gritty of what you can do as a player and just as one person, being kind of a self-leader responsible for your own actions there to steer your character. So what is character steering? We talked about using all of that cultural awareness, all of that other information, and we also have a link to the NordicLarp.org kind of definitive article on what steering is, and it has a lot more in-depth information than we're going to get into here, as well as some things that are more like a checklist that you can kind of go through on how you can steer. And then we have our workshop document as well, which we'll go over, and that kind of explains what you can do. It's like a checklist of like, this is what I can try. So why is character steering important in role-playing games? So we play these characters who can do, say, and quote unquote get away with things we can't in real life. And some of the things we can get away with are really positive and awesome, and like the example of I can play a woman in 1774 who owns her own business and is a badass. That's something that as a woman in real life in 1774, I probably would not have been able to do, especially as an Irish American. And that's a cool thing you could get away with. What else could I have gotten away with in 1774? Well, I could have gotten away with being racist, especially towards Indigenous people and Black people. Obviously, that's not something I want to do just because I could have gotten away with it in the past, right? I don't want to play that out. So when you think about why it feels good to kind of get away with those things that your character might, you know, definitely note that in terms of steering. So when I think about that and I'm really into my character, if I'm thinking these are the things I can get away with as this powerful character, you know, in 1774, there are some things I want to steer towards and some things I want to steer away from, and then some things I want to calibrate as well with other players, because we might be playing into some of those themes, but the way we approach it has to be a way that is agreed upon by all the players so we don't have hurt feelings. And then it's really important to calibrate and find that boundary. If you're playing somebody who's a villain, and as somebody who likes to play a lot of kind of like gray aligned characters, in fact, I see Ollie here. I'm playing in his LARP tomorrow, and the first thing I said when we were talking about our character backstory, I was like, oh, I want to play somebody who will be very, you know, ends justify the means. She's not a bad person, but I like playing the kind of character that can say, you know what, I'm going to do what's right, even if I'm breaking the rules. And that can go in different directions, right? And that playing that character tomorrow is going to require a little bit of steering for me. You know, I don't want to like break the story, even though it's largely freeform. I still have to kind of read the room, right, and take the cues from what the other players' goals are and what the story master is doing there in that situation. So, yeah, Dee Dee, in your role-playing experiences, how have you kind of found that it's important to steer?
My experience, a lot of it, how can I put this? A big demarcation between a good experience and a bad experience comes down to communication between characters in game and players out of game. That's part of why I'm a big advocate for meta information. And I say this because I'm someone who loves to play hard and dark and suffering. I love suffering, beautiful suffering. And then there's some days I can't for whatever reason. I always try to let people know, you know, just as an example, there's been a lot of things happening with Black people in America. And normally, the character I play in the historical rope play, she is a half French, half Haitian young woman. And so she's kind of an empowerment character. She's has the means to resist these sexist, racist systems. And I like to play into that normally. But there's also times when there's so much happening in the real world That's just something I need to step back from in the character for a while. And like I said, I try to let people know that, where it's like, I need to table the storyline for a minute if that's possible, or rework it. And that's really where the meta information comes into. I, as a player, am trying to work with everyone else to tell a story that's not going to make me super depressed at the end of the day. In character, sometimes you'll come up against certain subjects or certain circumstances where you don't quite want to break scene, but you realize you have to step back. And I find, and I kind of enjoy sometimes, figuring out ways for my character to remove herself from that situation. But also being ready as a player to tap out and pause the scene. So for me, it's a mixture of in-game, out-of-game steering that complements each other. That happens, particularly when it comes to balancing what we might have to go through in the real world versus what we're putting our characters through. That tolerance can change. Being aware of that makes a big difference. And as a player or a game runner, letting people know that, hey, if something's going on, LARP isn't therapy, roleplay isn't therapy, but you can be heard and listened to as a character or as a player. Because there have been times I've encountered games where people, I'm not always sure it's not malicious. Sometimes it is, realistically, but people will come hard and fast at my character and leave me with no options of how to react. And so being able to know that I can have an honest conversation or call something out in character or out of character helps me steer my gameplay and the gameplay of others. In some cases, if I see something happening and I can tell someone isn't okay. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that helps a lot. And I really relate to typically being the person who likes to play really kind of hard with that character. Like, I just love to lean in to whatever character I'm playing, but then something happens in the real world, right? So like this week I experienced something that was personally really rough on me. So normally I would have been like, great, I'm going to get all my LARP work done. I'm going to just really lean into all this role play. And I looked at my schedule and I was like, I'm really glad I only have one LARP this week, and I'm really glad I'm not running it. I'm just playing it, and I'm really just running a discussion, because sometimes things happen, and we're all in a pandemic where we all know people who are affected. I mean, I had COVID in March. Everybody wanted digital LARPs, and I couldn't get out of bed. So, it's hard, and we have to steer our play and our characters around that. And I think Dee Dee brings up a great point. Things change, especially in these campaign games or text-based role-playing games that go on for a while. The real world changes, our real life situation changes. People experience the pandemic. They have, like housing situations, relationship issues, financial problems. These are things a lot of people are experiencing, and even more so due to the pandemic kind of piling on. And so when you play long term with someone, if you're in a LARP that's more than 3 or 4 hours long, you got to keep that in mind. And even when you're only in a LARP that's 3 or 4 hours long, because I've run some like single session games. I have a game called Lore, which is ridiculous. It's live online raptor experience. It's about escaping an island of dinosaurs. Even during that game, I've had players say, I just got bad news about a friend, or I just got my COVID results back, or I need to leave 30 minutes early to go to a Black Lives Matter event. These are all big, super important things that affect our real lives. And so even if your game is really short, it's important to keep that in mind. Things change over time, just like our consent can change over time. You may need to revoke consent for something because your situation has changed, your feelings have changed. Doesn't mean the other person did anything wrong. It just means that your life or your situation has changed there. So that's important, and it really affects how we play and how we steer the characters. And you know, a lot of the play culture recently has done a really good job of saying the player is more important than the game. But I think as a designer and as a player, implementing that is so challenging with what we're facing today. And the digital format, as much as I'm a proponent of it for accessibility, adds another layer, because sometimes it's just hard to read someone over video versus in person. I happen to be a very good written communicator, so when we're talking in chat, you know, I'm hopefully a little less likely to misinterpret something, you know, compared to some others. But it's not the same as having an in-person conversation or even a phone conversation. And that can kind of add another layer of it too. So you need to kind of like do that check-in as well. And I do see there are a couple questions that we're going to get to at the end, but I do see a question that Jason just asked, how to engage passive players and should you as a GM check in. This is something I've learned a lot about actually by streaming on Twitch, gaming and non-gaming stuff. When you call it a lurker, or somebody who's just there to kind of watch and enjoy, sometimes they'll leave because they don't want to have the attention drawn to them. But when they've signed up for a role-playing game, the idea is they're there to participate. They're not there to be an audience member, right? So it's a really tricky balance because sometimes you don't want to call them out. So one thing I've done, if you're on Discord or Zoom, you can send a message to just one other person. So I'll check in with them by text, and I won't call them out in front of everybody else. Another thing is if I feel like their voice isn't being heard a lot, especially if I know they're dealing with something or they're marginalized and often talked over by other people, I will ask, you know, a question that doesn't require a lot of heavy lifting. So, you know, if we're talking about what color we should paint the kitchen of our spaceship, that's a great opportunity to call someone out without putting a burden of like a long philosophical conversation on them. I can just say, oh, hey character, we're gonna make the final choice for what color we should paint the kitchen. What do you think? And that way they know that they're welcome to be involved, but I'm not putting like a ton of pressure on them. Now, some of that is because in a digital LARP and also in real life LARPs and with tabletop as well, we're dealing usually with less than 10 people, ideally 5 to 7 at a time per GM. So part of the reason that number works so well is because I can keep track of 5 to 7 people at a time and hopefully be aware of their needs or see when they're becoming disengaged and reach out to them or do that little, you know, thing where I ask a more innocuous question in game. So that hopefully can help. And that way I'm also able to signal to the other players that maybe we need to steer to include to kind of bring it back to steering. Before I move on, Dara, did you have anything else to add or any other information for Jason's question there?
This is actually a question I had been thinking about a lot in preparing for today. And you know, I think there's always a risk we can get it wrong because different people respond to being called out differently. I myself, I'm someone with a bit of social anxiety when it comes to joining a game, and it takes me usually full sessions. I'm getting it down to half slowly before I'm really able to jump in. So I appreciate when people ask me questions and that sort of thing. Other people, they fall back and they're not quite as comfortable. The important thing is just letting them know they have space, like sending a one-to-one message to them or talking to them between scenes or sessions, I think is a fantastic thing to do. And sometimes it can be less intimidating to come in with a question or two. I'm a therapist full time, so I love open-ended questions. Sometimes it helps to be kind of specific, just, hey, is there, anything you didn't like about that last session? Or, if you're on break for 15 minutes, just sending a message, hey, I just wanted to check in. Is there something you want to accomplish or that your character wants to accomplish right now? Is there any way I can help you with that? That makes a big difference. But it is also on the players too. They have to respond and reciprocate in a way that is um, committed in a way. I guess it's a good way to put it. Um, I think that the most important thing, and this also goes back to making it so players can say if they're okay with certain things and consent, is being aware to not come across as punishing a player if they are not on their A game, if they just so happen to be quieter one day, um, or if they have to adjust consent. And I think that is a big, I don't know, for me, that's been an issue at times with speaking up because I don't want to feel like I'm the one derailing everybody's gameplay because I can't do something or because I'm really quiet and me jumping in is going to feel weird. And make sure everybody is given space. And to that end, don't also be afraid to pull a player aside and message them if they're dominating the session. I know someone, love them to death. One of the major issues when they do tabletop games is they can dominate a session and then it leaks over into real life annoyances, and that's never fun. And a lot of it would be addressed if the players they played with had just a general conversation about, you're kind of dominating the session. How can we fix this so it's more balanced, so we're not all irritated with each other by the end of the night or every other game? So don't be afraid to just very gently say, hey, this person kind of wants more screen time. Can you step back?
Yeah, and one thing that's also helped as a game master who usually writes the characters or usually works closely with the writers creating the characters is everybody has in-game their own niche, right? So they have their own specialty. And this works so well in my sci-fi game because the characters literally have a job to do on the ship. So as a GM, if somebody's like a navigational expert on the ship and they haven't been able to participate a lot, I know I can throw in something that requires their expertise. So making sure you kind of have that in-game piece there. As a GM, you can manipulate that in a positive way to include everybody there. So yeah, that definitely helps a lot too. I want to get to a couple other points, but we have so many questions. I think I actually kind of want to cut to questions early because I think it's going to be the most helpful for everybody. I did want to tackle a couple of difficult things that I've run into that I've been trying to improve. And Dee Dee alluded to some of them about when and where the game master needs to kind of step in. And then also, it's, it's tough because like I ran into one where a player said to everybody, oh, it's cultural differences. That's the reason we're not communicating properly. And I wanted to really give that person the benefit of the doubt. But at the end of the day, after repeated offenses, I was like, you're done. We've explained everything. And it's tough because I want to play internationally so much with digital LARPing. It's such a great opportunity. But I've run into that a little bit where, a person from a different country or a different culture isn't perceiving it the same way. And even in the United States, we obviously have a lot of very differing opinions on various issues, and our very existence is just so politicized that even when you're very clear about this is an inclusive LARP, sometimes people will just see cool, it's a LARP about space, I'm going to sign up. And they won't really, if they're very privileged, they won't necessarily think about all those other things. So that's been a big thing that I have to improve on, is kind of weeding out some of that behavior and not always making sure that the person offending everyone else has this benefit of the doubt just because they're saying I'm from a different culture. They're joining our LARP culture, which is created and supported by a lot of different people from a lot of different places. And I really need to look at it that way instead of saying, you're joining my culture and we're from the northeastern US and that's how it goes. It's got to be more like, this is the LARP culture we've created online. Everybody's welcome to try it, but if you run into those troubles, you just kind of have to tackle them. And I need to be a little more assertive with that.
It's hard to be assertive with it.
It is.
It really is. And, kind of jumping back with this in mind to what that Viking LARP was going through with having Nazis trying to join their game. I am a very pragmatic person. I'm sort of marketing minded in a certain sense of, I believe that the face we put on our games is incredibly important to letting people know that this is a game to try. I think it's Lost Colonies. One of the things I like about their page, if I remember correctly, I think it's Lost Colonies, is some of the artwork features different people who don't all look the same, aren't all the same age. And something as simple as that, making a banner for your Facebook group that isn't just all white people or white humans and then other fantasy races or cyberpunk aliens, makes a difference. Because that can kind of curb some of that whole, well, I'm a Nazi, but I can play this game, it'll be fine, coming in. And it's like, can you though?
Yeah, and big shout out to that LARP community. Lost Colonies, they actually changed their name. I think they're called Toricand now, because they got so much feedback about using the word colonies in their name and how that didn't reflect the kind of game that they're actually playing. So they're just really great. I've done some work for them, and I've also played, their LARP, and they're just so fantastic and accommodating. And another thing they've done that I've seen actually reflect in terms of steering gameplay is they've actually, because they normally play in real life, and so they have actually taken a drone with a camera on it, and they went throughout their campsite and recorded footage of everything and listed how wide the doorways are and how steep the pathways were, so that players could decide for themselves if it's accessible. But what they'll also do is, if you have an accessibility need, you can tell them and they'll steer some of the play around your needs. Now, you can't, and I'm saying this as somebody with a lot of accessibility needs, you can't go into a boffer LARP necessarily and say, well, I want to do this and you need to accommodate all of my needs. They're clear that it's a boffer LARP. So if I'm choosing to play, then I'm choosing to play a boffer LARP. But, there is a certain amount of flexibility that some LARPs, including the former Lost Colonies, does. If I say I really want to participate in a meeting of all of the merchants in game, I've noticed that it's in a location that maybe isn't the most accessible to me. Could we have it somewhere else? Something like that they would do. And so even though they might always have that meeting in the Merchant Guild Hall up a really steep hill, they'll steer the play and find another reason in game to have it maybe in the accessible tavern. So, games that do that, they really go out of their way to help, and it's just really noticeable. One last thing before we get to all these great questions that we're getting here. Dee Dee, you had mentioned that you wanted to talk about good questions for kind of building story and steering plot in a particular direction for player goals and everything. And I wanted to make sure you got a chance to kind of lead part of the discussion on that.
Oh, right. So, yeah, I've been thinking about really how I've played myself, how I've noticed other people play, and I'm a big research nerd, so I've read different articles on LARP and also text role play, tabletop RPGs, and I think in doing all that and taking in all that information, I realized something that I had encountered repeatedly since I first started role playing at like 12 years old is role plays live and die by when players focus only on their own story. We are all the protagonists of our lives and our own stories. However, we are also the NPCs in each other's lives. And that is a fantastic thing. So with that in mind, there's a few questions I have incorporated into my play and that also help guide the sort of games I choose to engage in if I feel like those questions are folded into the design. And that includes the question of how do I as a player uplift other players? How do I as a character uplift other characters and participate in their stories? Because when you participate in someone else's story, they're much more likely to participate in yours. It's a wonderful reciprocal thing. And often, particularly in the text role-playing world, that doesn't always get asked. I have so many times gotten into groups where it starts off okay, but then it very quickly becomes clear that anything that isn't about certain players, like directly that they want to do, that they want to control, they just won't throw you a bone. And that also goes back to tone as well. When you think about how to weave your character in with other characters' stories, uplift other players, you also have to think about, what sort of character are they playing with? What sort of play do they seem like they're, looking for? And you could talk about it out of character too. But really, that also helps you get in your character's head of how is my character seeing what this person wants? Is it something I want for that character? Is this character genuinely my character's friend? Or am I, using them and that complicates play? Thinking about those questions is a major thing that I think has improved my gameplay. I've had friends that have said coming in with that question of how do I uplift other character stories, that has changed the dynamics of their tabletop role play away from one person dominating the conversation. And another question, and this might be a bit controversial, it is how can I play to lose as much as I play to win? One of the first terms I ever learned in role playing was God modding. And the refusal, well, let me define that as essentially the refusal to accept losing, to accept not being the golden child in the game. And that's a lot less of something I have encountered in LARP, but in other interactive mediums, it's still very present decades after the fact I encountered it. I encourage everyone to be willing to lose. Not all the time. It doesn't have to be a huge loss, but part of a story is conflict. Part of a story is sometimes we lose. Sometimes it's as simple as, oh no, that person reached the bathroom before I did. That's life. And when you play to lose as often as you win, you can tell so much more of a vibrant story and keep a game going for longer if it's text-based. And the last question is, how can I respect the agency of other players? And this has come up more so in the text-based world, particularly when I've role-played with people who are more used to, say, collaborative story writing or aren't used to text-based roleplay, which is when they start making assumptions about what your character does and how they react to things. That becomes an issue because you're taking agency from the other player. Same thing in LARP. Keep in mind how you can respect that other person's agency as a player and as a character. And if you aren't respecting their agency as a character, be aware of the limits of good taste. And those are really just the questions I wanted to bring up today in short form. But I believe we have some great questions in chat.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that. And yes, the hands up on Zoom. That's what I was just going to say that too. If somebody's feeling lost or they need to say something and aren't able to kind of get a word in, that hands up feature on Zoom is just great. Yeah. So we're going to go over to some questions that Amber has collected from all of you. And then after that, we're going to go into just reviewing the workshop document, just so I can kind of show you what we were thinking when we made that, and so that we can discuss it and I can get some more participation from everyone else so you're not just hearing from us. But I wanted to address the questions that all of you have asked, and I'm just going to kind of go in order. So the first question is from Ray. Ray says, I play in a lot of games where characters are pre-written and the plot is designed to emerge from the pre-planned plot arcs and character goals. How can I steer things within that framework without getting in the way of that? Example, in your example, there may already be a plot where someone is intended to have cut a deal with a shady investor who turns out to be their long-lost cousin. And Ray was referring to Dee Dee when you said you could fund my character. And that's a great question. And what I would say is communication is a big part of that, not just with the GM, but with the other players. So with any participants. But yeah, some games are really heavily pre-written. I tend to avoid ones that have completely pre-written characters. I try to avoid actually making ones like that so that I can avoid some of those issues, because I don't love that either. I feel like you get a little more boxed in. But when you get those stock characters, sometimes there's more layers of drama written in, which is really fun. And you really need to get a feeling for how much you can cause a ruckus. I'm definitely known for rolling into a game that might be more stats based or something, and as a more storytelling oriented person, I'll say, well, I don't care that I don't have a diplomacy skill. I can play a diplomatic person, and I'll just do that. And it really does involve kind of like reading the room so you don't mess up the experience for other people. And I think, Ray, you do have to, unfortunately, sometimes you have to adapt your play style a little bit to suit the needs of the game or who else is there. Dee Dee, any other advice for Ray, especially with these games with the pre-written characters and kind of more on the rails plot?
Yeah, I think it's hard to avoid sometimes when there's sort of a structure or players have a plan, or the game itself is designed with a particular plan. I do think, depending on the situation, you can use that as an opportunity. And even if you have to put a pause on play for a second and talk about the fact that, oh, you guys were going to do a thing, that was the plot moving forward. Well, why not then bring in the fact that one character is rejecting your character's funding? That can be an excellent complication and actually add to the game. I'm a therapist full time. Look for the ways to turn, a poopy moment into a silver moment when you can. So that's really all I wanted to add there.
That's great advice. And the next question I'm going to largely throw to you. I'm just going to kind of make one suggestion and toss it over the fence to you, Dee Dee. SJ asks, I've been assigned a character in a LARP who is obviously coded as a race that is different from mine. Should I ask the organizers to rewrite the character? Should I downplay the race coding in the character description? I'm definitely not comfortable role-playing the race as written, but not sure what the right answer is here. My quick response is, if you're not comfortable, absolutely talk to the organizers. And, you know, you've already hinted that you are ready to communicate with the organizers, and that's definitely a good first step. But for some more details on that question, I will toss that right over to Dee Dee.
I echo what Tara has said. If you're comfortable talking to the organizers, definitely have that conversation. You know, it's a difficult conversation to have because in an ideal world, we'd like to say it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't be a problem. But in the real world we live in, it can be very tricky and possibly uncomfortable for you as well as other people. I would just suggest talking to them, getting their take on it, sharing some of your concerns, and just emphasizing, you know, I want to be respectful of other people. This feels really awkward. Is it okay to change this facet of a character? And depending on the game, it might be necessary to also ask is, you know, is this a critical component of this character in this world and setting?
Yes, and I will never ever run another LARP where a character, for whatever reason, is race coded, or a specific race that is different from the potentially different from the player, without a sensitivity consultant. I just make it happen. If that means I need to raise ticket prices $5 or $6 per ticket, I'll just be transparent and say, like, look, I need 2 sensitivity editors to pull this off. I just don't feel comfortable tackling this without, you know, somebody who is different from me one way or another, because it just, you know, it's just a thing that at this point is really required, and that's on the organizer. You know, SJ, that's not on you as a player. Your responsibility is to communicate and say, I feel uncomfortable with this, and their responsibility is to respond. So don't at all feel uncomfortable. I would also say, if you're able to, do it as soon as possible. It'll help the organizer if they have more time to rewrite things. So don't feel bad, but also the sooner you do it, the better, because that gives them more time and it'll impact people less. Next question is from August. What can you do when you've told someone that you aren't comfortable with a topic multiple times, but when you are around, they still talk about it? This is exactly what happened in the LARP I referred to, where there were, you know, cultural differences and somebody kind of violated the rules a couple of times. As a player, your responsibility there is to tell the organizer or the facilitator what's going on if you're not comfortable with confronting it directly. And really, that's kind of, you know, the end of your absolute responsibility. It would be nice as a player, especially if you have some privileges, to also kind of steer the play in a way that might shield yourself and others from that harmful topic. Like when we had this come up in my Cafe Afterlife LARP, all the other players really tried to steer the play away from that topic. And as a facilitator, first of all, and this is kind of facilitator advice, that's an indication that the players are not comfortable. If everybody's steering that topic away, and it's not just like, no, we're not going to talk about the magical dog I have hiding under my desk. If it's not that kind of, like, you know, thing that they want people to uncover, that's a big indication that players are not comfortable with the topic. Or player A sees that their friend player B is not comfortable and they're helping them steer the play away from that. As an organizer, and a way that I think I failed in that LARP I've been referring to, is they are really responsible, especially when somebody says something. They're really responsible for confronting the other player, and if there is more than one violation, really just removing that person so that they can no longer do harm. And of all the things that I feel guilty about in 2020, like, 2020, that's my big one, is that multiple people said something in the very first session, and because I was just not assertive enough or whatever, I didn't take action. So as an organizer and a facilitator, you have to be really assertive with those kinds of problems, and when you see it, confront it. I recently got a tool to help me with that, because this is really difficult for me. I am a cis woman, and I've been socialized to be really pleasing to everybody, so it's very hard for me, even when I'm in a leadership role, to say, I don't like that, I'm not comfortable with that, that violates the rules. So one thing I did, I got the, I'll show you what they are. It's called Green, there we go, camera, it's not working. It's called Green Plus Great More, and they're these cards that do RPG calibration, and they retail for $8. They're from the Fourth Place Games, which Ian Struckoff runs, and they basically take the OK check-in, if you're familiar with that, and they make them into cards, which I'm going to turn my background off actually so you can see these beautiful cards here. 1 second. I'm going to get rid of my logo.
That's such a good idea as a product. I love that.
Yeah, this was fantastic. This has been really, really great, and I now keep them by my computer. So if we're not comfortable, normally I tell people to do cut. I say cut and to do this if they're able to. But to make it even easier for myself, we have these cards. And I actually gave Terry, who's on here, he's one of my co-designers, and he GMs for me too. I gave him a set of these for Christmas because they're so useful. And while I'm not necessarily the kind of person that would use cards like, great, do this more, because I'll just respond enthusiastically, I am going to so heavily lean on that stop card, or things like warn, like if we're getting into a topic that might get sticky, to just kind of hold it up. And that way we don't have to verbally interrupt everyone. Where can you get these cards? It's the Fourth Place Games, it's called. And if you look them up on Facebook, they have a very great Facebook presence. They have their own Discord server and everything. These cards were originally in a Kickstarter, which is where I got them, but now they are just for sale. And they are calibration cards that do actually come with a list on how to use them and what each card means. And it's just really fantastic way of communicating. I feel like as a GM and as a player, I need an extra tool because it's really hard for me to be assertive. But having a printed card here reminds me that it's okay for me to say, no, we're stopping. And you want to stop and then go ahead and discuss it. And if somebody really has multiple violations, you need to just kick them out. I mean, I even have it in my rules that you will be removed from the game with no refund if you're going to be absolutely racist. Mysticon, yes, please do link the site in the chat. Yeah, I absolutely fully endorse Fourth Place Games. They're great. They're really great. They're really trying to help people. And these are developed from a lot of the OK check-in rules that have been used in various LARPs. A lot of us discovered it in the New World Magiscola community. They popularized it a lot in the US. And what's great about these also, because I actually have been just getting into GMing tabletop games. I really love running Bluebeard's Bride, which gets into topics like body horror and discovering basically the horrors that women face. And in that game, it has a lot of really fantastic safety rules. But as a GM, I feel like these would be really good for a tabletop game, especially because narrated games can be very immersive, but I feel like it's even easier to use these kinds of things in a narrated game. Or if I'm the one talking, right, and DD is my player and, throws up the just right card, then I know maybe I don't want to get too much more descriptive in, whatever kind of horrible thing I'm talking about in Bluebeard's Bride, right? So these would be great tools for that. And I've really been thinking about how to use these in those narrated games and even have an add-on where they can just get these from the 4th place. So Mythicon, thank you very much for linking that resource. They're fantastic. I'm going to go on to the next question here.
The next one is from Ray again, yes. It looks like.
Yep. Do you have thoughts on in-game safety mechanics or safe words? This is completely relating to what we just discussed. How useful are they for empowering players to manage their own experience? And do you think it's useful for people on the receiving end if it's a mechanic rather than a call out? What are the drawbacks? And I talked about how I feel bad stopping the game even as an organizer, and that's really something that each person has to work on themselves. I know also that in New World Magischola they use the OK check-in, which is like asking how you're doing, which is like, are you okay? And then the response is thumbs up, I'm good, thumbs down, I'm not great, maybe we need to chat about it more, and then this like so-so mechanic. And one thing I learned from Mari Brown of New World Magischola is those of us who are socialized to be agreeable all the time, we sometimes use I'm okay when we really mean I actually don't feel like I'm okay, because we're socialized not to trust our instincts and to be okay and go along with things, which can lead to us doing things that are maybe not safe for us or that we don't really feel comfortable with. So whenever we get that so-so, that's kind of another indication for me. Like I treat it as a no, and I take the play in another direction. So Ray, I appreciate that question, and I am totally sensitive to what you're saying, how it can feel like you're calling someone else out or being called out, and how that can almost be disruptive in the middle of an immersive experience. Dee Dee, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest part sometimes of asserting ourselves and asserting our limitations and boundaries. What I like about the cards you had, Tara, like one of them was just right. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes safety words and signals miss what that means. Because I think what happens a lot of times is we do that sort of middling, like I'm so, and we might not be able to fully grasp what in a scene are we so on. Either us when we're the one checking in, or when other people are just kind of letting us know how they're doing. We want to be in that just right category. And because we don't often have safety words that reflect that, we can end up middling. You know, we can end up in a place where somebody's like, okay, so, or we're doing fine. So we can amp something up, and it's not the right move. I think when designing a game, it is important because of that to let players know that safety isn't an afterthought, it's part of the game. You know, there's absolutely, at some point, someone's going to get their feelings hurt about something. That's just dealing with other people, unfortunately. But even with that being said, you know, if you go through and if you're a designer or as a player reading a document in your game, make it very clear that you want everyone to have fun. This is what it looks like. You know, check-ins should happen even if everything's good, even if everything is just where it needs to be. When you normalize that, then you create a culture where it is also okay to be honest and say, no, this wasn't fine. And I think with that too, it can be important to normalize if you observe something happening with another player where you get this feeling that they're not okay, and you feel like you need to check in with them. Even if it doesn't have to directly involve you as a player or a character, if something doesn't feel right don't be afraid to say, hey, how are you doing? How are things going? And I'm just saying, if something doesn't feel right, there's a reason. There's a reason. Our guts know. We're smart, intelligent people. We often can tell if something isn't working.
Definitely. And it's also a little bit of a responsibility of you as a player and a participant to answer questions in a way that will, be a positive experience for your mental health. For example, I mentioned I had a rough time earlier this week with a life event, and then I was just going over with the storyteller before we started this, my character for the Larp tomorrow, and I kind of thought about it for a second, and I was like, I want to add a couple of things in there that will help me process, but this is a dramatic Larp. This is possibly a little bit of a therapeutic experience for me, but there's that line between therapeutic and therapy, right? So I'm like, I'm going to sprinkle a little in, but I'm not going to make that central to the character, right? So I've left room for me to process a bit, but it's not the crying session I have with my therapist on Thursday, and that can help too. And I was doing a lot of research on self-leadership, and part of the reason I was looking that up was because I want to be a better leader in Larp community in terms of helping other people stick to their boundaries, because I really need to improve there. And part of this self-leadership concept in corporate culture is that you need to kind of take responsibility for what you're actually responsible for. So if I had gone too far with exploring certain topics in that character that I actually created, that's not the game master's fault. That's on me. I have to take responsibility for the fact that even if I didn't realize it, I went too far. So as a participant, just make sure that you're first kind of aware of and being responsible for your own emotions, which can get intense in any kind of role-playing experience, but be aware that you're responsible for it. And as a facilitator, it is your responsibility to kind of keep an eye on it and to encourage those check-ins. And one thing Dee Dee said that I would love to do more of is do those check-ins even when everything seems good, because not only might you catch something, it also normalizes it. And even though sometimes it's uncomfortable for me to do those check-ins, it'll make it easier for everyone. So then it's not, as the facilitator, it won't always be on me, because if I'm normalizing it, then my players are going to do it. And the burden is not all on me. We're a community, even though I'm running the game. So great questions there. Thank you very much for that, Ray. The next question, we have three more questions. The next question is from Mythicon. How do you handle spying as a character in Larp? There are some characters who are thieves, bandits, spies, and the like. I was curious how you handle the consent of that situation amongst multiple players. Now, I will say that Larps are so various in the amount of mechanics they have, and some Larps, like I used to play and help run a boffer Larp that had an actual mechanic for this, where you could get a skill and then you could like make a sign, which means that you're hiding and you're not there, so the character could actually hide and be concealed through magic or whatever. They would have a clothespin that you could stick on somebody's pouch and then go to a GM, and that would indicate that they've been pickpocketed, and the GM would take one item from the pouch and hand it to that person, right? So there are mechanics in some Larps that handle that. In terms of spying as a character in Larp, I've seen that work pretty effectively as a GM action in like parlor style Larps, where if you're investigating or want to know something else, or something like that, you can go to the GM and look. And yeah, the other thing is some Larps, it's like what you can actually do or what you can physically do. So if two characters are talking about something and I am able to physically get away with spying on them, like they don't know that my character's there, then I've spied, right? So if you can actually get away with it and it's not a skill-based thing, that's cool. Going along with steering, maybe and we've done this a lot in New World Magiscola, maybe those two characters, the characters would never want my character to hear that information, but the players are delighted that I found out that they are up to all sorts of evil magic and losing money and all sorts of terrible things. That's a great opportunity to steer, especially for them. And if I follow that up with an out-of-game check-in saying, like, I just want to let you know my character was there, they might say, like, oh, I knew, and I'm so glad that information is going to get out there. Then it goes back to what Dee Dee says. How can I play to lift? That's the phrase. That's the other phrase that we use a lot. How can I play to lift and help them as players accomplish their goals? And also, obviously, if my character was spying, it's going to be fun for them to be able to do something with that information. So it really, I think, depends on the tone of the LARP and everything like that. So so that's kind of how I would answer that. Dee Dee, anything to add there?
Not particularly. I guess one thing would be, I think depending on the game mechanics, checking in with other players. I know I keep saying that, but particularly with LARPs, I've heard some real horror stories around spying, stealing that have gone very wrong very quickly and have gotten oddly personal. So if something goes down and you feel slighted, deal with it, and by actually having a conversation about it out of character, before trying to force something in character.
Yeah. Oh, and the NPC army thing. We should talk about that. So in a text-based game, we've run into this thing that we kind of ended up actually really affectionately calling an NPC army. And I'm always tempted to have an NPC army too, even when I'm not facilitating. So I definitely understand why some players do this. But an NPC army, at least in this context, is a player decides that their character needs to know certain information that they only know out of game, and so they create an army of 20 spies that are NPCs that they that they use. And so going back to the spying thing, you know, it's like we kind of had to put some limits on that because it limited the agency of the other players and it started getting in the way of their goals. So we tried steering in game first, like maybe your spies don't find out that information, but really it came out as an honest conversation of like, hey, we're going to put some limits on this because multiple people are doing this thing. You know, please stop. So sometimes Mythicon, you really just have to make some rules, some hard and fast rules to prevent people who just want to do that. And it's like a play to win thing, I think, that happens. Ray asks another question. I so often feel like I'm being a problem player because I so often need to ask the GMs or players if we can change things. As a game runner and organizer, how can I make a game culture where people feel less anxious about speaking up and frame steering as a positive thing for my players? I have some thoughts. Dee Dee, do you want to tackle that one first, or would you rather me throw some stuff out there?
You go for it.
All right. I think one thing that I do as a game runner is, again, I never really have more than 10 people in a Zoom game. Usually it's more like 5 or 6 people. So keeping the number of people that I'm interacting with at a time low is great. 1 GM, if you're running a big game, 1 GM per 7 players, online or in person. That's the way that it works. So that's one thing you can do, is kind of having a person available. Something I noticed in Peculiar Crossroad Productions, our Mistis Arcane, was not only did they have 1 GM for every 7 players or so, but that the GM for each faction was also kind of there to help us in game. So for example, my character had to send a message to someone else. I didn't know where the player was, but it was like important to moving the plot along, to have that communication, and it was cool to do it in a letter. So I wrote the note out, I gave it to this facilitator character, and he took care of it for me and furthered gameplay and checked in and basically said, what are you looking for out of, you know, me delivering this letter? What kind of scene do you want? And they were proactive at our Mistress Arcane. They checked in and said, are you getting the game where you want? How can we steer it? So that really helped. And I think, you know, the facilitators checking in and saying and being proactive about that, right, that was also really helpful, and that's something you could do. One thing I like to do is, and it's especially easy in my digital LARPs, is I start out of game and we do out of game introductions, and we out of game talk about what we're looking for, what we're looking to get out of the game. And one thing that takes the pressure off of me as an organizer, and when I GM, I play as a participant too, is I start usually out of costume. My only job, if I've done all my preparation, is to show up and welcome everybody. And then I do a 15-minute break. If somebody just got back from work or something, or they haven't eaten, it gives them time to have a quick bite. They can use the bathroom, whatever they need to. That really helps people feel less anxious. And, you know, especially for pick up and play games, I say, look, just show up. You're good to go. Don't worry about it. And some players will really want to prepare, and they're not going to feel comfortable unless they're well prepared. And I get it, because I'm like that with New World Magic School. Like, I have my bags packed 2 weeks before I go to Wizard School. But I try to create an environment in the online LARPs where people can just show up and, you know, feel comfortable and get into it that way. Having a smaller group, you know, really helps. And also, like Dee Dee said before, doing those check-ins and checking in like between sessions can help as well. And Ray, just kind of like from a personal perspective, you know, and from getting to know you over these last few months, I think one thing that you do really well that can work especially well for any facilitator is say, hey, sometimes I have problems with X, Y, and Z, so please don't feel strange about expressing your needs if you have a similar problem or something else. Just like I've said in this discussion that, you know, I need to work on using that card, using that stop card, right? I need to work on this. You know, hopefully it makes other people who might feel hesitant know that they're not alone. That would make my players feel like they're on this journey with me. So Ray, I think for you in particular, that would be a really good approach, because you're a very empathetic person, and using that to your advantage is going to help you there. Dee Dee, anything else to add before we go on the last two questions?
Just want to emphasize that being human and being open with each other to a reasonable degree about, you know, sometimes we have problems with things. Sometimes something isn't quite working for us. And our goal at the end of the day is to tell a good story and have fun. You know, and that fun looks a lot of different ways. For me, it's beautiful suffering as much as it is lighthearted laughs. You know, but that fun is the goal. And I think just reminding people, you know, if something isn't working, that means somebody isn't having fun. So let's try and fix it so we can all have fun together. You know, that makes a big difference.
That's a great attitude. We have a few more questions, and then I'm going to kind of just open it up for discussion. Let's see. The next one is from August. What if you see someone that seems to feel like they're being left out when there is something important going on and doesn't know how to get themselves involved in what is going on, yet not seem like you are interrupting what is going on and to seem rude? Yeah, you know, like sometimes as a player, I've realized there are some missed opportunities that just, you can't be involved in every little thing. But when you see somebody that is continually left out of every big scene or every big event, That's really, really challenging. And that, I think my answer is really short. I'm going to say just do an out of game check-in, especially if you're worried about things feeling awkward. A lot of times I'll say try steering first in game, and if that doesn't work, directly talk to the person. Because especially like most players will understand, they'll pick up on the cue if you're trying to steer the game, but for accessibility reasons, or maybe because they're upset about something in real life, sometimes people won't get those cues, and you have to just have that conversation. Dee Dee, anything else that you would want to add to that?
You know, I think being, how can I put this? Like being able to be aware of how the game is going in a way. Um, as players, as game runners, taking the time to, if you're doing like a short 4-hour session, you know, maybe every half hour or so, maybe more depending on the players you have, step back and ask yourself, who's doing the majority of the talking? You know, is every character getting their needs met? Is every player participating? Because again, sometimes people have those days where they're just quieter than others, you know. That's fine and that's normal and that should be respected. And also, you know, taking a big picture look at how everything's flowing makes a big difference. You know, I'll also say, and this is also kind of a self call out for my social anxiety, it is also on the players to step up and be honest if they feel left out. It's uncomfortable, but like Tara said, sometimes we just don't, we're just not paying attention to certain things, or we don't have, you know, I will say in some cases our communication skills are different, and how we communicate requires more clarity, you know. And being overtly able to say, hey, not much is happening with my character, can anybody work with me on this, or I want to change it up? Because there's two things that tend to happen in my experience. One is your character is just having a hard time integrating into play, or you as a player, and that is just not finding the right in. And two, which is I think the harder one, other players can be so caught up in the story of the character that's kind of naturally flowing along, particularly if you're new to an ongoing game, that they just forget to include you.
Yeah.
And you gotta be willing to step up and advocate for yourself. And it doesn't have to be aggressive. It doesn't have to be angry or bitter or resentful. And it shouldn't be seen as automatically that. It should be you just saying that your needs aren't being met and the game isn't fun for you right now. Can we fix this so that's fun for everyone?
Yeah. And I've been in that situation as a player. I mentioned being a big fan of New World Magiscola. So like 90% of the games I've played there have been flawless for me. I've loved them. I got to lean into things. It's been fantastic. But there was one where I felt like, oh, if I'd had more information, maybe I wouldn't have played this character, or like it didn't feel great to be excluded in game, even though, you know, I'm hoping people like me out of game. And there was just a lot to uncover there that we hadn't talked about. And, you know, that happens sometimes, and it's rough. But it doesn't mean to like give up, especially, you know, when it creates anxiety for you.
Oh,
So in my situation, I didn't approach it with anxiety, but it like produced anxiety.
and I want to jump back in here because you made me think of something, Tara, which is, don't game runners and designers, don't be afraid to tell a player that their character idea or story concept is not going to work for your game.
Yeah.
You know, there was a server I was a part of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and the setting was pretty cool. It was a cyberpunk setting with sort of a science fiction take on sort of fantasy tropes kind of folded into it. And the most recurring problem with it that ultimately led me to leave is it was everybody who joined and the people who started the game more or less had completely different ideas of what the game should be.
That's rough.
Right. And it wasn't a matter of everybody being wrong. It was more of a matter of what the runners wanted the game to be, which was more of an action themed PvP cyberpunk game. Wasn't clear at all on their documents or their website. And if you're getting a lot of, say, character sheets that are coming through, like this person wants to be a spy, this person wants to be a spy, this person wants to be a black market merchant, da 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 da. And really, what you're looking for is foot soldiers and FBI agents, and this. You might have to address that in your game documents, and you also have to talk to potential players and say, this is the tone we're going for. This is what this game is about.
Yes.
This isn't going to work.
Or do the difficult thing as a designer with a vision and say, well, I made a game about foot soldiers, but what my players really want is a game about spies and, black market stuff, and adjust the game. And I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen in Intrigue and Independence. And I love where the game went. And part of that as a designer is when you put your stuff out there, especially in freeform LARP or freeform tabletop, when you put that out there, it means you might own the IP, but really, the players are taking ownership of it. If they're doing their job as participants, they are co-creating with you. They are taking a character sheet and doing so much more with it. So it's really a compliment, I think, when it evolves. And it happened a lot in New World Magiscola, which is originally not intended to be like a campaign LARP. But the player cultures have changed over time, right? And the game has to make changes to adapt. And that's totally fine and normal, but it's something you have to learn as a designer, I think. Jason asks, what do you do about players who are trying to win at LARP, especially when it comes to metagaming? Again, my short answer is I try and steer them at first in game, and if that doesn't work and they aren't reading the room, that's an out-of-game conversation privately. I try not to call them out, but I have that game and say, or have that conversation, and you have to say, this LARP is not designed that way, and that's not what the other players are looking to do. I do have maybe another game that will work for you, or I can suggest a different community that might fit your needs more, because I do design LARPs that are more like win at this LARP. But in this LARP, the goal is actually to tell the best story possible with everybody else. So I just kind of have learned, try steering in game, try steering them in that direction in game. And if that doesn't work, it's got to be, and I hate confrontation, but I've learned to do it. It's got to be, have that convo, or watch your community suffer. Dee Dee, anything else to add for the win at the game kind of people?
Nope.
It's a pretty clear, it's a pretty clear answer. One more question, and then I'm going to stop questions here. Let's see. Question from Mel, which is, do you have advice for these are hard, difficult, challenging aspects of the LARP, and if they're not for you, you shouldn't play? I've had instances where people I know will struggle with those issues, want to participate in plots that were written to get in their scenes. That's tough. It's on player. It's a lot of it's player responsibility, your self-leadership as a player. So as a designer, you have to be really clear about your themes and your expectations and your level of accessibility. Because I used to advertise my games as accessible, but guess what? Accessibility needs clash. And so there is no one game that will be accessible to everyone. So my games, my LARPs online, are largely accessible. I mentioned Peculiar Crossroads Productions, who made Armistice Arcane, and how great they are at handling a lot of player concerns. They actually have a therapist on staff and at their games, which not every game can afford or have access to. But wow, like, talk about taking care of your players. I know I didn't utilize the therapist, but I felt really confident about going a little bit further into some of those themes, knowing that if I got actually upset, I had a plan to talk to a therapist immediately. But in terms of your question, you know, it's got to be on the player to self-select. It just really has to be on the player to self-select. Peculiar Crossroads has another LARP coming up that they're planning for post-pandemic, and the themes of the LARP I could emotionally handle. There's not too many subjects that I fortunately cannot handle mentally or emotionally, but the physical accessibility level of the LARP was just not going to work for me. And as much as I wanted to play, and as much as they actively invited and included me, which I thought was really important, they didn't decide for me, they invited me. But then I read it and I self-selected and said, I can't physically, participate. And I even messaged them and I was like, thank you for inviting me, because I want to be invited to things and I want to make decisions about my own accessibility level. That's really important. So, we have to rely on our community to self-select. And I did GM for another LARP once where we had participants sign up with accessibility needs, and I was on staff and I was kind of their accessibility and sensitivity person. And, I didn't make decisions for the players about what they could and could not do, especially since their accessibility needs are different than mine. But I did say to the game runners, just so you know, I have experience with these players, and this is what I've observed in other games. It would be great if you had these resources available in case they ask. So I wasn't like, assign someone to babysit them, because that's so wrong to say, especially with accessibility needs. But I did say, make sure you have somebody who is able to help them have a safe game that they can access. And that ended up being really useful because it allowed the game runners to delegate the resources appropriately. And also, as a GM, it wasn't all on me to fulfill the accessibility needs that I wasn't capable of fulfilling for other people. So, again, let people self-select, but also try to just have things available. And having the therapist available, wow, I wish every LARP could afford that. It's rough because everyone deserves to be paid for their time. But, that was just really fantastic. But they were clear about, this is what we have available. I am clear about, I don't have some of these things available. I let people know my resources are limited. I designed this game alone because that's how the money works out, unfortunately. Or this game is more expensive because I am paying a sensitivity editor. And I tell people, I'm paying a living wage. This is what I pay. So you got to let people self-select. And if you have an inkling that they might need more help, or that the game isn't for them, have your kind of plan ready to assist them or to be okay with them opting out after they try. Dee Dee, anything to add to that one before I go into our document here?
Just really echoing that concern. It is so important that people be given the autonomy to self-select. And it's also important that in a polite, respectful, and sensitive way, we be direct. And a lot of times I think people put those two things, directness and sensitivity, against each other. Well, no, they work together rather well. If the reality is you are not able to provide as accessible of an experience as you would like, or as a certain player needs, own up to that. That is not necessarily a complete failure. It is just a reality we work in. If there is something that, based on the limitations available to you, if you are doing a boffer LARP and, you have very specific limitations where you are in terms of campsite, in terms of what you're working with. That's the reality of the situation. And while always it's wonderful when we can problem solve, sometimes there is no current solution. And it sucks, but that doesn't mean somebody is, it doesn't mean somebody is a bigot. It doesn't mean somebody is happy about the situation on the game designers or game runners side of things. It doesn't mean players are asking too much on the player sides of things. It can just mean we don't have a solution right now. And, you know, even before getting to that point with accessibility in terms of certain themes or subjects, if you have someone who's coming into a game who you've played with before, who you know personally, it can be awkward, but sometimes having a conversation and just asking, is this something you can handle in this game? Because the design of this game means that there's no way around sexism. There's no way around horrible murders in this game about serial killers.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
you just have to be honest. And who knows, that honesty could lead to developing another game that is a bit more family friendly, but still about serial killers. You know, it's a bit more CSI than Investigative Discovery Channel.
Yeah, it reminds me so much of Sanctuary Avalon, which is a game that I did about, it's centered around Queen Guinevere instead of King Arthur. And so I wanted to do like a feminist version of Arthurian legends without some of the problematic attachments of Marion Zimmer Bradley, who wrote Mists of Avalon. And I was able to do it because since I'm a woman, I was like, I'm making a femme experience. This is an experience for anyone that identifies as femme. And that's just how it is. And some people did feel excluded, you know, and they were like, well, where's a version I can do? And guess what? We're going to do a version for men, and we're going to do a version for everybody, including people who are agender or genderqueer, so that everybody can participate in it. So that conversation actually resulted in a really fantastic development and people telling me what they wanted. And so I was like, cool, well, I can hire a masculine person to run this game. That's cool. That's great. So Dee Dee, that's totally true. It can result in some great choices. We are so over time, but I want to, again, give you the link here to the document, the worksheet that you can use for each LARP or other role-playing game you play. So you can think about how you've steered your character in the past. So even if you think you're new to this, you probably aren't. When you really think about it, you've probably made some really cool steering decisions. Excuse me. You can think about the game itself and its limits, and then basically this worksheet will walk you through some character analysis to help you kind of calibrate and be more compatible with the game and everything like that. So that said, please definitely use the document. I did list also the resource again from NordicLarp.org because that inspired a lot of the document there. And yes, Sam, I will do my best to post the comments and links with the recorded content. Yes, I think I can download that too in Zoom. And before we go, I did kind of want to have some of it be a discussion too. So if anybody has anything to add, feel free to kind of raise your hand and chime in. Otherwise, that's basically all she wrote for today. But I'd love to hear if anyone has any other insights that we haven't mentioned or covered in chat. We still have a bunch of people in here, which makes me so happy. I hope this was helpful.
Hi, this is Sam. Can you guys hear me?
Sam.
Hi.
I don't do LARP. We're actually playing a first edition Dungeons and Dragons with a friend of ours, and this has been actually very insightful for that. So thank you guys for that. Yeah, thanks for that. I'm definitely going to be checking out your Facebook page and seeing what the wonderful world of LARPing has to offer, because I've heard of it since the late 90s when I was in the military, and I know it goes back farther than that. Just something I've always been interested in, never really had the time because of life, the way things are. But I just wanted to say thanks for sharing your guys' experiences and opening my eyes to some of the things that people experience, and how to excuse me, how to better be inclusive in the future.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of content. Yeah, we have a lot of content on that, and Amber just posted some more helpful links. And I can also tell you, we have, if I can tempt you into LARP, we have some of the best LARP designers in the world on watching this right now, just kind of looking through some of the names. But also we have some designers that do both LARP and tabletop, or just tabletop here. So, I really do hope it's helpful. I think there is a lot of crossover, and a lot of tabletop gets LARPy, and a lot of LARPs get kind of tabletopy, and it's okay to blend that and to be storytelling focused. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Sam, this is Ashley, who I'm pretty sure you found this from my page. But if you have any questions about it, you can feel free to ask me too. And I can vouch for Tara. I've played in a couple of her games and they've been amazing.
Right on, sweet.
Thank you so much. And yeah, joining the email list is the best way to find out about everything, because I run like some tabletop stuff. I run Bluebeard's Bride. I run Pagan Rituals even, and all that stuff you can find out about on the email list.
Cool.
So, yeah. Anybody else before we go ahead and end the call today?
I think Mythicon did a hand raise on
Awesome.
Zoom. I think that's what that means.
Yes, Mythicon. Hi.
How y'all doing? So I did have a couple of things. One's a kind of a comment, one's more of a question. First off was with regards to communication. Communication is often one of the shortest and longest distances between two people. And it feeds directly into consent. A lot of the larger LARPs, because I participate in Florida here with some pretty big LARPs. There's 150 people that usually attend these things, and that's just standard. Having a community representative as a player advocate is something that I've seen bandied about, that I don't know about one of the LARPs I participate in, which is Dystopia Rising, and for some reason that name just right out of my head. And the other one is called Mythic Adventures. Dystopia Rising is very good about player advocation and communication. Mythic Adventures has been working very hard to improve it, but as far as I'm aware, there isn't really a player advocate yet. Do you think that that is a role that is essential or very important to have?
If, as someone who's fairly new to LARP, I'll say take this with a grain of salt for me, but I think it depends on how that advocate is empowered, and as as contextual as this can be, who that advocate is or who those advocates are. The fear I have encountered in all forms of role playing is if something goes wrong, who's making the decisions and how are they making them? I think if you are able to be more, I guess, transparent in the decision-making process of who that person gets to be, or encourage other, people who are running the game to be transparent in thinking about, oh, is this person, do we have a person who we can rely on to be as impartial as possible, as fair as possible, and do we have a process that can help them? Because you can have the perfect person for it, the person everyone loves, respects, and who knows how to read minds like they're a part of the X-Men. And if you don't have the system in place that is transparent and clear to players about if something goes wrong, what is this person's role? Who do we contact directly first? You know, what are the protocols? Then you're just going to run into issues.
I'd agree. And also, there's been a lot of talk about how to handle things on a safety end and having like a safety committee. The best example of that I've actually ever seen was at a one-time convention called HLG Con, where they had a safety person kind of roaming the halls and just kind of being available, but not everyone knew who they were. So the cool thing was you could email or message them at any time and they would respond, but it wasn't like, oh, I know that this person's the safety person, so now I have to be on my best behavior. That was really cool. But I think all of these things take a lot of resources to do. But if you are running a game with 150 people, you're kind of ethically and hopefully financially at the point where you can have that person and compensate them. But you know what Dee Dee said about who that person is, because that person could be a gatekeeper in a bad way. That person could be like, I've definitely declined that role because the staff are all white or all straight, and I'm like, you don't need another white or straight person doing this. Maybe consider a person I recommend, or if you don't have the money to pay, a marginalized person to help you, I will help you fundraise for them. I'm like, look, I'll make it super cheap. You pay me $25 and I will blast this out and get you enough funding to hire a sensitivity consultant or a player advocate who, is sensitive to the needs of your whole community. So hopefully that's helpful there.
Yes, that was very insightful. Thank you. And the second question that I had has to do, it's kind of tangential to the previous one I asked, was something I've seen at some games is a very direct control of the story and of what is allowed by top level staff. And in other games, I've seen it kind of broken up into more localized management crew, like assistant GMs, essentially, for a better term. There are many terms that have been used to classify these people, but how many would you say is appropriate to have on a staff? I think I heard 1 to 7 was a number that you guys said previously. Mm-hmm. But how do you balance empowering those people without losing control of the overall scope?
Again, for me, it's that really 1 to 7 rule has really helped. And I've also found that as someone who's running a for-profit game and as somebody who's advised both for-profit and non-profit but kind of needs to break even games, that ratio also barely works financially. So yeah, that player ratio helps, and it's a good safety feature too, because if I have hundreds of people and one GM that I trust for every 7 people, then I know they're seeing things that I won't be able to see. So, I find that really helpful. Storymaster, you had something to add as well, and I know you also have experience in this area and might be able to offer some insight.
Well, thank you very much. Hi, I'm from the UK as well, so whether our live role-playing system is different to yours, I don't know, but I've been doing it for about 35 years, so many years of LARPing and role-playing. And I actually went through working for young people and with various problems. And what I found doing online LARP, which I've been doing this year, obviously been moved to do that, is how incredibly diverse and also how mindful you have to be for everyone who's participating. And what you obviously wouldn't get ordinarily, or days before Facebook when I was certainly LARPing, is any background knowledge of your players. You hear what they say in front of you. But when you become Facebook friends, you can see their daily lives, their daily struggles, and you know, when I'm writing a story, and we only do like hour and a half Larps, I can write it around those players, and I encourage those players to write their characters, and then I guide them while they're writing them. So if I start seeing that they're writing something which I don't think is going to be quite appropriate, I'll kind of steer it around a little bit, and then maybe add some plot in for them that would work for the character, where they can interact with other people where they might find it difficult ordinarily. And that's something I've never had to do before, but I'm really enjoying it, and you can see people blossom. I'll give you an example. I had a lady who wanted to play a prince, and I was like, that's fantastic. Okay, let's see how we're going to do this. And there's going, well, I don't identify yet, but I want to kind of investigate that side of my personality. So I said, okay, let's look at history, and let's have a look at some characters. Let's look at some sort of people who might have done this before. And there was a princess. I've forgotten her name now. It's around sort of the 1800s, who disguised, they passed themselves off as a man at that time. So we had a long sort of dialogue about it, and it helped her develop, helped her become more comfortable. And then the story I wrote sort of guided her into it, and also involved other players. So yeah, I'm loving it. I think it's very interesting. And thank you so much, Dee Dee and Tara and Amber. Is it Amber on the side who's doing something for organising this? It's been really, really good, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow, Tara.
Yes, I can't wait. I want to get to August. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Please correct me if I'm not. To have you in here as well. Hi.
You're saying it right. Hello. Going along with what the story master was saying, I totally agree with you. That is something that I've noticed as well. Given I'm only 17, but I've been LARPing for about 10 years, that is definitely something I've noticed as well. I've seen a lot of people come and go from LARPing, and it's definitely seemed like the longer people have stayed, the more they've understood it, really. But also, with that being said, there's also been a couple of people who have like LARPed for however many years, and they're like, I'm still not understanding this. So it's really important to be able to try and communicate with them and trying to figure out how they best learn to help them better understand what's going on, really. For example, I have a friend that recently got into LARPing and D&D and all, and they really struggled for the first year or so. And I started talking to them more about it, and they were like, well, I haven't really understood it because no one's really told me in a way that I understand. I was like, okay. And they told me how they would understand it, and I was like, all right, let's put it this way, put it into this view. So I helped them understand it better that way, and they were like, it looked, when I told them in that way, it looked like they're like a light bulb had gone off in their head. And that was probably one of the more impactful moments, because you always, it's always nice to see someone understand better, because then you know that they'll enjoy it more.
Absolutely.
So I've just noticed that more and more as time goes on, and it's really impactful to know when you've made that kind of impact on someone and made someone feel more welcome as well, because then you know that they'll actually enjoy it instead of be like, oh, they didn't really help me out, so that I feel like this isn't really something I want to do, you know. They feel more included if people help them out more, I feel like.
Yeah,
It's true. It's true. You know, I think as a new player, for me, you know, in the last few years to LARPing in particular, that sense of welcome makes all the difference of if I follow through. You know, like I hate feeling
Yeah.
flaky. Like
Yeah.
what I'll say one of my virtues is I'm my father's daughter. I can bounce out whenever, but I hate feeling flaky like that. But there's certain times when you go into a game environment and nobody's made an effort to
Yeah.
make it easy for new players to join, make it
Definitely.
easy for new LARPers to join, because a LARP is a completely different animal than,
Oh yeah.
and that's something people don't get. Like, not to go off on a tangent,
Right.
it's so hard because people don't understand. It's like, well, isn't digital LARP the exact same thing as just like being around a table? And it's like, no, it's a very different vibe. Isn't LARP the same as just doing regular Dungeons and Dragons? No.
Not at all. Not at
You
all.
know?
A
having
good
to explain that so many
example
times to
actually,
people.
a movie that I would recommend to like have people realize how different they actually are is Unicorn City.
I haven't heard of that one.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, I would
yeah.
definitely suggest watching the movie if you haven't. It definitely like puts into view like how different the two are. I'm gonna say this right now, if you are like more familiar with the two, it helps a lot. But the way that they have some of the schemes, the plots and stuff, especially with how they set up their weapons, might upset you.
Well, thank you for that recommendation. We are coming up on a full hour after we were gonna end. But it's been so wonderful chatting with everybody, and I hope to game with all of you soon. I've been brainstorming all sorts of fun stuff to run, but I'm also so excited to play other people's LARPs and other games because, boy, I need a break, right? I need to just play and relax. So I'm excited to do that too. But thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who contributed. I always make sure everyone gets paid. So Dee Dee will be compensated, Amber will be compensated, and that comes from the generous help of people putting into that fund. So thank you so much. And I absolutely had a wonderful time, and this recording will be up. And I posted, Sam, yes, please post a link to a movie. And also, if anyone else has links to games that they're running, whether it's tabletop, LARP, text-based, whatever, please post it in the chat. We would love to have that in there. I'm going to keep talking for a few minutes just so everyone has to do that. We're all doing such different stuff. That's what's so cool about it. When I started in this space, I think I was the only person like monetizing a campaign online LARP, you know, pretty consistently. And then here and there I met other people, and now there's a bunch of people doing it, and it's so exciting because we're all doing it in our different format. I mean, mine's like keep it simple, just go on Zoom, you know, like kind of thing. But people are doing all sorts of different stuff. They're doing really neat stuff with Discord and also with using the different breakout rooms and Zoom, which is fun. So yeah, please check out what everyone else is doing and check out this media that we've posted. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming by.
Thank you. It was wonderful being a part of this panel and hearing everyone's questions. It was great.
Thank you.
I had a great time. Thank you guys.
Thank you for putting us together.
Thank you. And thank you, Amber, for running all of the moderation there. I definitely appreciate you. Bye, everybody.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.